He stood in the doorway and couldn't believe what he was seeing. His daughter, the little girl who hadn't eaten in 2 weeks, was chewing. He covered his mouth. Tears poured down his face. And all he could think was, how? James Oliver lost his wife 6 months ago. Catherine died in a car crash. No warning, just gone. Their 3-year-old daughter, Sophie, didn't understand death. She just knew her mummy wasn't coming back. And something inside her broke. She stopped talking, stopped playing, stopped smiling. And 2 weeks ago, she stopped eating. James hired the best doctors in the country. Child psychologists, feeding specialists, people who'd spent their whole careers helping children. None of them could reach her. Sophie just sat there, getting thinner every day, staring at nothing. Her father would sit with her for hours, begging her to eat, promising her anything. But she wouldn't even look at him. Mrs. Chen, the woman who'd helped raise Sophie, cried every time she saw the little girl fading away. James was a billionaire. He could buy anything in the world, but he couldn't save his daughter. Then one morning, a new maid arrived at the house. Her name was Jessica. She was young, quiet, and came from a neighborhood where people didn't have much. When Mrs. Chen told her about Sophie, Jessica didn't look shocked. She looked understanding, because when Jessica was 7, her mother died too, and she remembered what it felt like to not want to live anymore. That afternoon, Jessica went upstairs to Sophie's room. She didn't force her to eat. She just sat with her, and she told Sophie about her own mother, about grief, about missing someone so much it hurts to breathe. Sophie's eyes flickered. Just for a second. The next morning, Jessica made something simple. Just bread with butter and a little salt. Nothing fancy. She sat down next to Sophie and started eating it herself. Sophie watched. And then, for the first time in 2 weeks, she reached out her hand. James was downstairs when Mrs. Chen ran in, barely able to speak. She's eating. He didn't believe it. He ran up the stairs and froze in the doorway. There was his daughter, holding a piece of bread, chewing slowly, tears streaming down her face, and sitting beside her was a woman he barely knew. Before we begin, click subscribe and hit that like button. Tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because if you've ever felt helpless watching someone you love fade away, you need to see what happens next. Sometimes God sends help from the last place you'd expect. Jessica's first morning in the house started before sunrise. She took the train from her neighborhood on the south side, watching the city wake up through frosted windows. By the time she reached the high-rise in the loop, the sky was turning gray over the lake. Mrs. Chen let her in through the service entrance. The kitchen was bigger than Jessica's entire apartment. Everything gleamed stainless steel, granite counters, windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. Outside, the lake looked like sheet metal under the winter sky. Mrs. Chen didn't say much, just handed her an apron and pointed to the cutting board. "Breakfast first," she said quietly, "for the girl." Jessica washed her hands and started chopping fruit. The knife made soft sounds against the board. Everything else was silent. No TV playing, no music, no voices, just silence. After a while, Mrs. Chen came back with a tray. On it was a small plate of scrambled eggs, toast cut into triangles, and a glass of orange juice. Jessica watched her arrange it carefully, like she was preparing something sacred. "Does she ever ask for anything?" Jessica said. Mrs. Chen shook her head. "She doesn't talk anymore." "At all?" "Not since her mother died." Jessica's chest tightened. She knew that kind of silence, the kind that swallows you whole. Mrs. Chen picked up the tray and headed toward the stairs. Jessica kept working, but her mind was somewhere else. 15 minutes later, Mrs. Chen came back down. The tray was untouched. She set it on the counter without a word, then walked to the sink and stood there, staring out the window. Jessica dried her hands. "How long has this been going on?" 2 weeks since she stopped eating completely. "But she's been disappearing for months." "Disappearing?" Mrs. Chen turned to her, eyes red. "You'll see." Upstairs, a door opened and closed. Footsteps moved across the floor above them, slow, heavy. "That's Mr. Oliver," Mrs. Chen whispered. "He's been working from home since this started. Doesn't leave her side for long." Jessica nodded. A few minutes later, he appeared in the doorway. Tall, dark suit even though it was barely 7 in the morning. His face looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He didn't look at Jessica, just poured himself coffee from the pot and stood by the window, staring out at nothing. Jessica kept her voice gentle. "Good morning, sir." He glanced over, like he'd forgotten anyone else was there. "You're the new hire," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Jessica Morrison." He nodded once, then looked back out the window. "How long do you think you'll last?" The words weren't meant to be cruel. They were just tired. Jessica met his eyes. "As long as she needs me to." For a second, something flickered across his face. Not hope, just surprise. Then he set down his cup and walked out. Mrs. Chen let out a long breath. "He's a good man," she said quietly, "but he doesn't know how to fight something he can't control." Jessica looked at the untouched breakfast tray on the counter. She thought about Sophie upstairs, about a little girl who'd stopped eating because the world stopped making sense. And she thought about her own mother, about being 7 years old and not understanding why God would take someone you loved. She whispered under her breath, so soft Mrs. Chen couldn't hear, "I don't know how to do this, Lord, but if you brought me here, don't let me waste it." Upstairs, Sophie sat on the floor of her room, knees pulled to her chest, staring at a picture on the wall. In it, her mother was smiling. Sophie hadn't smiled in 6 months. She didn't know someone downstairs was praying for her. But somewhere deep inside, in a place she couldn't name, something stirred, just barely, like the first breath before waking up. Jessica spent the rest of that morning learning the rhythm of the house. She wiped down counters that were already spotless, organized cabinets that didn't need organizing, kept her hands busy while her mind stayed upstairs. Around 10, Mrs. Chen brought down another tray, still untouched. Jessica glanced at the eggs, now cold and hard. The toast dry at the edges, the juice sitting in the glass like it had given up. Mrs. Chen scraped everything into the trash, without a word. Jessica watched her. What does she do all day? Sits in her room, stares at the walls. Sometimes she looks at pictures of her mother. Mrs. Chen's voice cracked. "That's all. Does her father go up there? Every few hours. He talks to her, reads to her, begs her." She shook her head, but she doesn't respond. It's like she's not even there anymore. Jessica's throat tightened. She knew that feeling. The one where you're still breathing but you're not really alive. You're just waiting. Waiting for the pain to stop. Or waiting to stop feeling anything at all. She turned back to the sink, scrubbing a pan that didn't need scrubbing. "God, I don't know what you want me to do here, but please, show me." Around noon, James came down again. He moved like someone carrying weight no one else could see. Shoulders tight, jaw clenched. He stood at the counter, staring at his phone, but Jessica could tell he wasn't reading anything. His eyes weren't moving. She set a plate in front of him, a sandwich she'd made nothing fancy, just turkey and cheese. He looked at it like he'd forgotten what food was. "You should eat, sir," she said gently. He almost smiled. Almost. That's what I keep telling her. It's different when someone reminds you you're not alone. He looked up at her then. Really looked. Like he was seeing her for the first time. "You lost someone," he said. It wasn't a question. Jessica nodded. "My mother, when I was 7. And you stopped eating too?" "For a while, until my grandmother sat with me every single day and reminded me I was still here for a reason." James's eyes filled. He looked away quickly, but not before she saw it. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "I've tried everything." Jessica's voice was soft but steady. "Maybe she doesn't need you to fix it. Maybe she just needs you to sit in it with her." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the sandwich and took a bite. Not because he was hungry, but because someone had reminded him he wasn't alone either. Upstairs, Sophie pulled her knees tighter to her chest. She could hear voices below. Faint, distant. She used to run downstairs when she heard her father's voice. Now she just stayed still, waiting. For what? She didn't know. But somewhere deep inside, a part of her was listening. That afternoon, the light through the windows turned soft and golden. Jessica was drying dishes when Mrs. Chen came in with the dinner tray, a small bowl of soup, crackers, apple slices cut into stars. Jessica watched her arrange everything just so. "Mrs. Chen," she said quietly, "can I take it up this time?" Mrs. Chen stopped, looked at her. "That's not necessary." "I know." Jessica's voice was steady. "But I'd like to try." Mrs. Chen studied her face. There was something in Jessica's eyes, not arrogance, not pity, just calm. Finally, she nodded. "If Mr. Oliver finds out and gets upset, I can't protect you." I understand. Jessica lifted the tray with both hands. The stairs felt longer than they should have. Each step carried weight. Not from the tray, but from what waited at the top. The second-floor hallway was lined with photographs. Sophie as a baby, Sophie laughing on a swing, Sophie in her mother's arms, both of them smiling like nothing bad could ever happen. Jessica's chest ached. She stopped outside Sophie's door. It was cracked open just an inch. She knocked softly. "Sophie, my name's Jessica. I brought your dinner." Silence. She pushed the door open slowly. The room was pale blue, filled with toys no one had touched in months. Stuffed animals lined up on shelves. A dollhouse in the corner, perfectly arranged. And on the floor, sitting with her back against the bed, was Sophie. Jessica's breath caught. The little girl looked so small, so fragile, like if you spoke too loud, she might disappear. Her hair hung loose around her face. Her eyes stared at nothing. Jessica set the tray down on the dresser, not in front of Sophie, not close to her, just nearby. Then she pulled a chair over, but not too close, 5 feet away, maybe 6. She sat down, and for a long time, she didn't say anything, just sat there, quiet, breathing the same air. Minutes passed. The light from the window shifted. Finally, Jessica spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You know, Sophie, you don't have to eat if you don't want to." Sophie's eyelashes flickered. Just barely. Jessica kept her voice soft. "My grandma used to say that when someone's heart hurts too much, food doesn't taste right anymore. Like everything in your mouth feels wrong, like it doesn't belong there." Sophie's head turned, just a fraction of an inch. "I lost my mama when I was 7, Jessica said. "And after she died, I didn't want to eat either. Nothing made sense anymore. I kept thinking, why should I eat when she can't?" Silence. Then, so quiet Jessica almost missed it. "Your mama died?" Jessica's eyes filled. "Yes, baby, she did." Sophie turned her head a little more, looked at her. "Mine too." Jessica nodded slowly. "I know, Mrs. Chen told me. I'm so sorry." Sophie stared at her, really looked at her, like she was trying to see if Jessica was telling the truth. "Did it hurt?" Sophie whispered. Jessica didn't lie. "Every single day." "Does it still hurt?" "Sometimes, but not the same way." Jessica leaned forward just slightly. "It gets softer, like it's still there, but it doesn't cut as deep." Sophie's lip trembled, and for the first time in 2 weeks, something in her eyes changed. Not happiness, not relief, just recognition, like she'd finally found someone who understood. "Will you stay?" Sophie whispered. Jessica's voice broke. "As long as you want me to." Outside the door, Mrs. Chen stood with both hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. And downstairs, James sat at his desk, staring at nothing. He didn't know that upstairs, for the first time in months, his daughter had spoken. Jessica couldn't sleep that night. She kept thinking about Sophie, about those hollow eyes, about the way she'd whispered, "Mine too," like it was a secret she'd been carrying alone. The next morning, Jessica arrived before the sun came up. The city was still dark, streetlights reflecting off empty sidewalks. She let herself in through the service entrance and stood in the quiet kitchen, thinking, all those untouched meals, all that expensive food prepared by people who knew nutrition but didn't know Sophie. Jessica opened the fridge, moved past the organic vegetables, the imported cheeses, the carefully labeled containers, and reached for the simple things. White bread, butter, American cheese in plastic wrap. She heard footsteps behind her. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway, surprised. "You're here early." "Couldn't sleep," Jessica said. Mrs. Chen looked at what she was holding. "What are you doing?" Jessica set the bread on the counter. "When my grandma was trying to help me after my mama died, she didn't make me fancy meals. She made grilled cheese, just butter, bread, and cheese. Nothing special." Mrs. Chen's face softened. "I used to make those for Sophie. Before everything fell apart?" Mrs. Chen nodded, eyes glistening. Jessica turned on the stove. "Then maybe that's what she needs. Not something perfect, just something that feels like home." The butter started to sizzle. She laid the bread down, added the cheese, let it melt slow. The smell filled the kitchen, warm, simple, honest. Mrs. Chen wiped her eyes. "Mr. Oliver won't like this. There's a meal plan. nutritionist said. I know what they said. Jessica's voice was gentle but firm. But she's not eating what they planned. So, what do we have to lose? Footsteps on the stairs. James appeared in the doorway, dressed for a run, hair still damp with sweat. He stopped when he saw the grilled cheese in the pan. What is that? His voice was tight. Breakfast, Jessica said calmly. That's not on the plan. I know. His jaw clenched. The doctors said she needs specific nutrients. Jessica turned to face him. The doctors said she's physically fine, but she's not eating what they prescribed. So, with respect, sir, what are we losing by trying something different? James stared at her. Part of him wanted to tell her to stop, to follow the rules, to do what the experts said. But another part, the desperate father who'd watched his daughter fade for 2 weeks, wanted to believe anything might work. If this doesn't work, he said quietly, you're done here. Jessica met his eyes. And if it does? He didn't answer, just turned and walked out. Mrs. Chen let out a shaky breath. You're either very brave or very foolish. Jessica cut the sandwich into small triangles. Maybe both. She placed them on a plain white plate. No garnish, no presentation, just food. Real food, the kind that tasted like love. I'm taking this up to her, Jessica said. Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. He'll be watching. You know that, right? I know. Jessica lifted the plate with both hands. Her heart pounded as she climbed the stairs. Not from fear of losing her job, but from hope. Please, God, let this mean something. At Sophie's door, she knocked softly. No answer. She pushed it open. Sophie was in the same spot as yesterday, floor by the bed, knees pulled up, staring at nothing. Jessica sat down in the same chair, set the plate between them, and then she did something no one expected. She picked up a triangle and took a bite herself. Sophie's eyes moved, just slightly. Toward the food, Jessica chewed slowly, like she had all the time in the world, like there was nowhere else she needed to be. Sophie watched her, eyes following every movement. The room was so quiet Jessica could hear her own breathing. She swallowed, then set the triangle down on the plate between them. My grandma used to say grilled cheese tastes better when you share it with someone you trust. Sophie's voice came out barely above a whisper. Mommy made these. Jessica's chest tightened. Did she? Sophie nodded. On Sundays. After church. Then she had really good taste. Silence. Sophie stared at the plate. Her small hand lifted, then dropped back into her lap. Jessica didn't push, didn't say, just try it, or it's good for you, or any of the things adults say when they're trying to fix something. She just sat there, present. Finally, Sophie spoke again. Her voice shook. If I eat it, will I forget her? Jessica's throat closed. She leaned forward, just a little. No, baby. Eating it means you remember her. Every bite is a memory of Sunday mornings with your mama. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Promise? I promise. Sophie's hand reached out again. This time, it didn't stop. Her fingers were so small they could barely hold the triangle. She brought it close to her face, smelled it. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Jessica whispered, It's okay to cry, Sophie. Your mama would want you to remember her this way. Sophie opened her mouth and took the tiniest bite. She chewed slowly, eyes squeezed shut, tears falling faster now. She swallowed, and then something inside her shattered. She started sobbing deep, broken sobs that sounded like they'd been trapped inside her for months. Jessica moved closer, pulled her into her arms. Sophie collapsed against her, still holding the grilled cheese in one hand, clutching Jessica's shirt with the other. I miss her, Sophie cried. I miss Mommy so much. Jessica rocked her gently. I know, baby, I know you do. It's okay to miss her. It hurts. I know it does. It hurts so bad. I know. Sophie cried and cried, her whole body shaking. And, through it all, Jessica just held her. Didn't tell her to stop. Didn't tell her it would be okay. Just held her while she finally let it out. In the doorway, James stood frozen. His hand was over his mouth. Tears poured down his face. He'd just watched his daughter eat for the first time in 2 weeks. But more than that, he'd just watched her cry for the first time since the funeral. He'd thought the silence was the worst thing. But now he understood. The silence was her drowning. This, the crying, the breaking, this was her coming up for air. He took a step into the room. Sophie saw him through her tears. Daddy. He dropped to his knees beside them, his voice breaking. I'm here, sweetheart. Daddy's here. Sophie reached for him with her free hand, still holding the sandwich in the other. He took her hand and kissed it, over and over, like he was trying to make up for every time he hadn't been able to reach her. I'm eating, Daddy, she whispered, like Mommy wanted. James couldn't speak. He just nodded, tears streaming. Sophie looked at the sandwich, then back at Jessica, and she took another bite, then another. Each one a choice, each one saying, I'm still here. Mrs. Chen stood in the hallway, both hands pressed over her heart, watching the impossible happen. The child who'd been disappearing was coming back. Not all at once, but bite by bite, breath by breath. Sophie finished 2 triangles, her first food in 14 days. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and swollen, but there was something different in them now, something that hadn't been there before. Life. She leaned against Jessica, her small voice breaking the silence. Miss Jessica, yes, baby? Can we have this every Sunday? James let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Every single Sunday, sweetheart. I promise, Jessica whispered, barely loud enough for anyone to hear. Thank you, God. But even in that moment of breakthrough, something hung in the air, unspoken, unfinished. Because Sophie had started eating, but no one yet understood why she'd stopped. An hour later, Sophie was tucked into bed. Her eyes were heavy, exhausted from crying and eating and feeling everything she'd kept locked away for so long. Jessica sat in the chair beside her, holding her small hand. James stood by the window, his back to them, shoulders shaking. The room was quiet except for Sophie's breathing. Then, so soft it almost disappeared. Miss Jessica? Yes. Baby? Why did the doctors try to make me better when I didn't want to be better? The air went still. James turned from the window. Jessica's heart stopped. What do you mean, sweetie? Sophie's voice was small, honest, the way only a child can be. I wanted to go to Mommy. Jessica couldn't breathe. James took a step closer, his voice breaking. Sophie, what are you saying? Sophie looked at him with those wide, innocent eyes. Grandma said Mommy went to heaven, so I thought, if I stopped eating, I could go there too. The words hung in the air like broken glass. James made a sound, strangled, animal, and pressed his hand to his mouth. Jessica's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. Oh, Sophie, I tried really hard, Sophie whispered, but it hurt. My tummy hurt and my head hurt and I got so tired. But I kept thinking if I just waited a little longer, I'd see her again. James crossed the room and dropped to his knees beside the bed. Baby, he choked out. Why didn't you tell me? Sophie's lip trembled. You were always sad, Daddy. You were always working. And when you came home, you looked at me like I made you sadder. The words cut deeper than any knife. No, James whispered. No, sweetheart. That's not. After Mommy died, you stopped reading to me. You stopped tucking me in. You were here, but you weren't here. Her voice cracked. I thought maybe you didn't want me anymore. James pulled her into his arms, his whole body shaking. God, no. Baby, no. I wanted you. I want you. I was just so scared. Of what? Of losing you the way I lost her. His voice broke completely. So I worked. I stayed busy. I told myself if I could just provide everything you needed, the best doctors, the best care, I could keep you safe. But I didn't realize. He couldn't finish. Sophie touched his wet cheek. You left me alone, Daddy. James sobbed into her hair. I know. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Jessica sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. This was why Sophie stopped eating. Not depression, not illness. A 3-year-old trying to solve her grief the only way that made sense to her. If Mummy's gone, I'll go too. Sophie pulled back, looked at her father. Are you going to leave again? James gripped her hands. Never. I swear to you, sweetheart. Never again. Promise? I promise. Sophie turned to Jessica, eyes full of questions. Miss Jessica, do you think Mummy wants me in heaven with her? Jessica's voice shook. No, baby. I think your mama is watching you from heaven right now. And you know what she wants? What? She wants you to stay here, to grow up, to laugh and play and eat Sunday grilled cheese. Jessica leaned closer. She wants you to live the biggest, most beautiful life you can. Because that's what mamas want for their babies. Sophie's eyes filled again. But I miss her. I know. And you'll always miss her. But missing her and living your life, those two things can happen at the same time. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at her father. "Daddy, will you stay with me tonight?" James's voice broke. "Every night, sweetheart, starting now." But even as he held her, even as she closed her eyes and drifted toward sleep, one question burned in the room. How close had they come to losing her? And what if Jessica hadn't arrived when she did? James didn't leave Sophie's room that night. He sat in the chair beside her bed, watching her sleep, terrified that if he looked away she might disappear. Her breathing was soft and steady. Her hand rested on the blanket, fingers slightly curled. She looked so small, too small to carry the weight she'd been carrying. Around 3 in the morning, Jessica appeared in the doorway with a cup of coffee. She didn't say anything, just set it on the nightstand and turned to leave. "Wait," James whispered. She stopped. He looked at her in the dim light from the hallway. "How did you know?" "Know what?" "What she needed, what we all needed." Jessica was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know. I remembered what it felt like, to be that alone." James's voice cracked. "I let her be alone. You were drowning too. That's not an excuse." He pressed his palms against his eyes. "She thought I didn't want her anymore. My own daughter thought I'd given up on her." Jessica sat down in the other chair. "You didn't give up. You just didn't know how to reach her." "I should have known." His hands dropped. "I'm her father. I should have known. You were grieving too. You lost your wife. You were trying to survive. By abandoning my daughter? By protecting yourself the only way you knew how." Jessica's voice was gentle. "My grandma used to say grief makes us do strange things. We push away the people we love most because loving them hurts too much." James stared at Sophie's sleeping face. "I almost lost her. But you didn't, because a stranger walked into my house and saw what I was too blind to see." Jessica shook her head. "I'm not the one who saved her. You are." He looked at her, confused. "She didn't need me to feed her," Jessica said. "She needed her father to come back. And tonight, you did." James's throat closed. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "When Catherine died, I told myself I had to be strong, had to keep everything together. I couldn't fall apart because Sophie needed me." He paused. "But I was falling apart, every single day. I just did it where she couldn't see. So she thought you'd moved on, and she thought she had to do the same. Or," his voice broke, "or follow her mother." Jessica reached over and squeezed his hand. "Just once. You're here now," she said. "That's what matters." James looked down at their hands. "I don't know how to do this, how to be what she needs." "You don't have to know. You just have to show up." He nodded slowly. Jessica stood. "Get some rest. I'll be downstairs if you need anything." "Jessica," she turned. "Thank you," his voice was thick, "for not giving up on her. On us." Jessica's eyes glistened. "That's not something you give up on. Family is family." She left him alone with his daughter and his thoughts. Downstairs, Mrs. Chen was already awake, making breakfast, even though the sun hadn't risen yet. She looked up when Jessica came in. "How is she?" "Sleeping, finally." Mrs. Chen wiped her hands on a towel. "I heard what she said, about wanting to go." Jessica nodded. "That poor baby," Mrs. Chen's voice trembled, "carrying that all alone." "She's not alone anymore." Mrs. Chen studied Jessica's face. "You're going to stay, aren't you? If they'll have me, they need you, both of them." Jessica looked out the window. The sky was just starting to lighten deep blue, turning to grey. A new day coming. "We all need each other," she said quietly. Upstairs, James finally fell asleep in the chair, his hand resting near Sophie's on the blanket. And for the first time in months, neither of them was alone in their grief. But morning would bring something new, something fragile, something that looked a lot like hope. 3 weeks passed. Sophie ate every meal, small portions at first, then more. The color came back to her cheeks. The light came back to her eyes. She started talking again, asking questions, telling stories, giggling at things only 3-year-olds find funny. The penthouse that had felt like a tomb started to feel like a home. James changed too. He stopped working 16-hour days, started coming home for dinner every night. He read to Sophie before bed, tucked her in, stayed until she fell asleep. And on Sundays, they made grilled cheese together. That became their thing, their ritual. Sophie would stand on a step stool at the counter, carefully spreading butter on bread, while Jessica guided her hand. James would man the stove, flipping sandwiches like he'd been doing it his whole life. They'd eat at the kitchen table, not the formal dining room they never used anymore, just the three of them, laughing and talking about nothing important. Those were the mornings Sophie lived for. One Sunday, about a month after everything changed, Sophie looked up from her plate. "Miss Jessica?" "Yeah, baby? Can I ask you something?" "Anything." Sophie's voice got quiet. "Do you think my mummy and your mama are friends in heaven?" Jessica's chest tightened. "I think they're best friends." Sophie smiled. "Good. Then they're not lonely." James's eyes glistened, but he smiled too. After breakfast, they bundled up and walked to the park a few blocks away. The air was cold, but the sun was bright. Sophie ran ahead to the swings, her laughter echoing across the playground. James and Jessica walked slowly behind her. "I don't know how to thank you," James said quietly. Jessica shook her head. "You don't need to. You gave me my daughter back. She was never gone. She was just waiting for you to come home." James stopped walking, looked at her. "You're not just Sophie's caregiver anymore. You know that, right?" Jessica met his eyes. "I know. You're family." Her voice broke. "Family." They stood there for a moment, watching Sophie swing higher and higher, her joy filling the space between them. That night, after Sophie was asleep, James found Jessica in the kitchen. She was cleaning up, humming softly to herself. "Jessica." She turned. "I need to tell you something," he said. Her heart sped up. "Okay." He took a breath. "These past few weeks, having you here, watching you with Sophie, seeing how you've changed everything." He paused. "I've realized something." She waited. "I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air. Jessica's eyes filled. "James, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know. You've given Sophie and me so much, more than I could ever. I love you too." He stopped. "You do? How could I not?" Her voice shook. "You let yourself break so you could heal. You showed up for her. You became the father she needed. That's who I fell in love with." James crossed the room and kissed her, gentle, careful, full of everything they'd both been too afraid to say. When they pulled apart, both were crying and smiling at the same time. "What do we tell Sophie?" Jessica whispered. James looked toward the stairs. "The truth, that sometimes, after loss, love finds a way back. You think she'll understand?" "I think she already knows." The next morning, Sophie came into the kitchen and found them making pancakes together, holding hands. She climbed onto a stool and watched them for a long moment. Then, with the wisdom only children have, she said, "Are you going to get married?" They laughed, surprised. James knelt beside her. "Maybe someday. Would that be okay with you?" Sophie thought about it seriously. "Only if we still have Sunday grilled cheese." Jessica grinned. "Forever and always." Sophie nodded. Then yes. She hopped down and hugged them both. And in that moment, in that kitchen filled with morning light, something beautiful was born. Not just healing, but hope, a future, a family. But there was still one more thing Sophie needed to say. One more truth waiting to come out. And it would change everything. 6 months after Jessica walked into that penthouse, everything looked different. Not the walls or the furniture or the windows overlooking the lake, but the life inside. Sophie turned 4 in September. They threw a small party, just a few kids from her preschool, Mrs. Chen, and the 3 of them. No big production, no expensive entertainers. Just cake and laughter, and Sophie blowing out candles while everyone sang. When the last guest left, Sophie climbed into Jessica's lap. "Miss Jessica?" "Yeah, baby. I made you something." She pulled out a folded piece of paper from her pocket. Jessica opened it carefully. It was a drawing. 4 figures holding hands. A tall woman with curly hair, a little girl, a man, and a woman with dark skin. At the top, in Sophie's careful handwriting, "My family." Below the 4 figures, Sophie had drawn a 5th one, smaller, up in the corner with clouds around her, her mother, watching over them. Jessica's breath caught. "Sophie." Sophie pointed at the drawing. "That's Mummy. She's in heaven with your mama, but she's still part of us, right?" Jessica pulled her close, tears streaming. "Right, baby. Always." Sophie looked up at her. "I'm glad you came here." "Me too. I think Mommy sent you." Jessica kissed her forehead. I think she did too. That night, after Sophie was asleep, James and Jessica stood on the balcony. The city stretched out below them, a million lights against the dark. James took her hand. I've been thinking. About what? About us, about Sophie, about everything. He turned to her. I want to make this official. Jessica's heart stopped. What do you mean? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Her hand flew to her mouth. I'm not good at speeches, he said, voice shaking. But I know this. You walked into our lives when we were drowning. You didn't just save Sophie. You saved me too. You taught me what it means to show up, to be present, to love without fear. Tears poured down her face. I don't want to do life without you, he whispered. Will you marry me? She couldn't speak, just nodded. He slipped the ring on her finger and pulled her close. They stood there, holding each other, crying and laughing at the same time. I can't believe this is real, she whispered. Neither can I. 3 months later, they got married in a small ceremony. Sophie was the flower girl, just like she'd asked. She wore a white dress and carried a basket of roses, grinning the whole time. When James and Jessica said their vows, Sophie stood between them, holding both their hands. A family, not the one any of them expected, but the one God had been building all along. That night, after the guests left and Sophie was finally asleep, the three of them sat in the living room. Sophie was curled up on the couch between them, half asleep but refusing to go to bed. Tell me the story again, she mumbled. Which story? James asked. The one about how Miss Jessica came here. Jessica smiled. You've heard it 100 times. I want to hear it again. So James told it. About the morning Jessica arrived. About how she sat with Sophie when no one else could reach her. About the grilled cheese that changed everything. Sophie listened with her eyes closed, a small smile on her face. When he finished, she whispered, Daddy. Yeah, sweetheart. I'm glad I stayed. James's throat closed. Me too, baby. Me too. Sophie opened her eyes and looked at both of them. I think this is what Mommy wanted. For us to be happy again. Jessica kissed her head. I think you're right. Sophie yawned. Can we have pancakes tomorrow? James laughed. Anything you want. And grilled cheese on Sunday? Always. Sophie smiled and closed her eyes again. Within minutes, she was asleep. James and Jessica sat there, watching her breathe, neither of them wanting to move. We did it, Jessica whispered. You did it. She shook her head. No, we did. All of us. James looked at his daughter, healthy, happy, alive. Then at his wife. Then at the life they'd built, from the broken pieces. And for the first time in over a year, he felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Peace. Outside, the city lights glowed against the night sky. But inside, in that home that had once been so cold and silent, there was warmth. There was laughter. There was love. And there was proof, quiet, undeniable proof, that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the most beautiful beginnings. That healing doesn't come from money or power. It comes from showing up, from sitting in the pain with someone, from choosing, every single day, to keep living. Sophie stirred in her sleep and mumbled something soft. Jessica leaned close. What'd you say, baby? Sophie's eyes stayed closed, but she smiled. I said, I love you. James and Jessica looked at each other, tears in their eyes. We love you too, sweetheart, James whispered. More than you'll ever know. And in that moment, everything they'd been through, the grief, the loss, the fear, the breaking, all of it, made sense. Because it led them here. To this family, to this home, to this love that was stronger for having been tested. The billionaire's daughter hadn't eaten in 2 weeks. But that wasn't really the story. The story was what happened after, when a humble woman walked into a broken home and reminded everyone inside that they were worth fighting for. That love doesn't give up, and that sometimes God's greatest miracles don't look like miracles at all. They look like strangers who become family, like grilled cheese on Sunday mornings, like a little girl learning to live again, and like a father who finally came home.